Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self and I'll be your host. My guest today calls himself an armchair explorer, but I think he's selling himself short. Greg Winchester has spent 40 years in commercial real estate, managing portfolios through the S&L crisis, the great financial crisis of 2008, and then COVID. And in the middle of that career, he and his partners bought out the founders of their company with everything they owned personally guaranteed. 300 employees, no safety net, jumping off the high dive and hoping that there's water somewhere below. He's a lifelong Boy Scout who fell in love with the outdoors in the Roan Highlands of North Carolina. He served on the board of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and he's built quite a philanthropic life that touches all 7 continents, from an orphanage in Bolivia to a 1,000-year-old cathedral in England to Shackleton's grave on South Georgia Island. Risk takes a lot of forms, and today we're going to talk about most of them. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Greg Winchester. All right, Greg Winchester, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. You come with high recommendations from people that I have known for a long time, trust their judgment on a lot of different things, but and of course that's our friends Brew and Jen Davis, Jennifer Farr Davis. And so thank you for taking the time this afternoon to spend a little bit of time with me. And I'm really, based on the stuff we've kind of chit-chatted about to start with, I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Thank you, Joshua. Glad to be here and hope to share some good stories and lessons.
All right. Well, I did not ask you this before, but you're in Florida right now, but where did you grow up? Are you a North Carolina native or did you grow up somewhere else?
Yes, I grew up in Charlotte.
Okay.
And went to school there until I went to college, off to college to UNC at Chapel Hill.
And you studied business in Chapel Hill while you were there?
Yes, I stumbled into business, and then when I graduated, I wasn't sure what I wanted to be, so I got a job with a bank. I thought a banker would be a good place to start, and I got a great job opportunity with the First National Bank of Atlanta. So I moved to Atlanta back in 1979 as a trainee.
Where in Atlanta did you live?
So I lived up near Stone Mountain.
Okay.
And commuted into 5 Points at the bank headquarters every day.
I went to high school in Marietta, the Walton High School. And
sure.
So Stone Mountain was the place we went a few times to go to the laser light show out there.
Right. Beautiful place.
Yeah, it is. It is. So how long did you live in Atlanta?
So I first lived in Atlanta for 4 years, met my wife Jan there. We got married. Then shortly after that, I had a job opportunity with a big financial firm real estate financial firm in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, okay.
So we moved to Dallas and ended up being in Dallas for 13 years.
Oh, wow. How did Dallas compare to Atlanta?
Well, they're both, large metropolitan areas in the Sun Belt that are growing rapidly. All have some similar headaches, but they all have great opportunities. I like the weather and topo better in Atlanta, but the one thing I like about Texas is I love the people and I love the can-do attitude in Texas.
Yeah, so coming out of school, you had a banking job. Was it a typical entry-level banking job that you would have, or were you heading in a certain area of banking out of the gate?
So looking back, kind of talking about the dots here that are really interesting to follow. Before I graduated from UNC, I wanted to take a real estate course. Went to the real estate professor and he said, well, we're not offering courses for undergraduates, sorry, only graduates. So I was still determined. So I spent the summer going to Century 21 and took the real estate brokerage course and found out I loved it. So when I went to the bank, they had a management trainee program and they allowed you to go through different areas of the bank. And I found out they had a real estate finance department that focused mostly on commercial real estate, which fascinated me. And so I ended up stumbling into the commercial real estate finance industry and arena through the bank there. And my job was first to help them clean up troubled properties and troubled loans that had come out of the 1974-75 recession and the Arab oil embargo. So I learned the business from the cleanup side of it.
Yeah.
And then later I became, they trained me to become a construction lender to make loans on new developments.
And so have you stayed with real estate? Well, I guess tell me a little bit more about, your time with the bank, and then you mentioned a large financial institution that you moved to. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I've had a 40 plus year career in real estate in different segments. So when I went to Texas, I was with a very large real estate financial firm. We had a very large mortgage REIT, and I helped the team there build up a nationwide commercial real estate lending portfolio. So that's when I first learned about real estate nationally. And then in 1996, the firm I was with was winding down. So I was assessing where to go, and I knew that Wall Street was getting very involved in real estate as a result of being able to be opportunistic in the early 90s from the crash that had occurred with the S&L crisis and the tax reform acts. So I went with a small firm with two bankers I knew from the bank I first went with called Hatfield Phillips, and I helped them build a commercial loan servicing company, an asset management company. So we were a third party services provider, providing financial services to large financial institutions. And then in 2003, so I moved back to Atlanta in 1996. And so in 2003, myself and two other gentlemen there who were running the company, we bought the company from the founders in a management buyout. And we embarked upon a very fast paced sprint to diversify the business and grow the business with a lot of different financial firms, banks, insurance companies, private equity firms that were lending and investing in commercial real estate. So we ended up building that firm up. We actually had a book of business and a division of our company that was very good at handling distressed debt and troubled properties. And when 2008, 2009 came along, we were very busy, and it was very good for us, where it was, really challenging and problematic for people on the other side. But we worked through that. We helped clean up a lot of pieces and parts of the industry after that crash. And then in 2015, we retired, and we had some parties that were interested in our company. So we put the company up for sale, and we ended up selling it to a wonderful private equity firm out of the Midwest. So then exited that business, which was a commercial real estate financial services business, in 2016. And along the way, I had started investing in commercial real estate projects. So I just started really a small family office investment company, which I call Summit Investors. And we invest in mainly real estate projects throughout the Sun Belt. They could be ground up new developments, they can be projects that are being bought and renovated and rehabbed. So they're across the board, but they tend to evolve around housing and warehouses and storage.
Okay.
So I've been involved with that. So after I sold the financial services firm with my partners, I started the investment company. So at this point, I had been a lender, co-owner of a financial services company, and then an investor in real estate. And then about the same time that I got an investment company going, Auburn University approached me about helping them out with their real estate program. They had a master's of real estate development program. They were looking for someone who could help them connect more with the industry and come in as an adjunct, and also to help out with industry relations. So I thought it was a great way to give back. So, and also to stay active. So I've been involved with Auburn now for about 10 years, more on the education front and industry engagement front. And it's all been around real estate. So stumbling into real estate, my senior year of college, here I am 40 years later, still in commercial real estate, and it's been a great industry.
Well, and somebody listening so far might be going, okay, commercial real estate and adventure podcast, these aren't necessarily the same conversations, but what I know being on one side of business is the things you just went through, and you kind of jumped right over it. And I'm going to go back and ask you some questions, but the things that you chose and did along the way were probably at times extremely risky and challenging in the same ways that somebody's hiking a mountain or pursuing some other adventure outdoors. And so I think it's always interesting to look at different canvases of where risk and adventure take place and see what is learned along the way. But obviously real estate was something that you found an interest in, but to go from interest to, and I think I'm going to ask you specifically about the time where you bought out the founders from the business that you were working with. Why did you choose to do that? Because you probably had choices at that time to either, go work for somebody else or start your own deal without paying somebody for a business. Why did you choose to buy the business that you were working in? And what were some of the risks at the time that if you didn't do the sprint to diversification and if that didn't work, what had you put yourself out on a limb to do this?
So yeah, that's a very good point to address. So at that point in time, up to that point in time, I had spent over 20 years as an employee of a financial institution or working for financial institutions. But the two founders of the company that I was working for and ultimately my partners, we were approached by the founders who told us that they were either going to sell the business or we could buy the business. And we were confronted with the decision, do we take what was immense risk at that time? And we did not have large capital to put at risk, but we had relationships. So we went to one of our major customers at that time, and they were very, very supportive of us buying the business and continuing on with the business so they'd have continuity of business operations and services.
Yeah, sure.
And so they gave us a very strong contract, and we were able to take that to the bank where I initially started working. And the bank where I started made us a loan to buy out the partners.
That's kind of full circle.
So that was a full circle event, and also a very nervous event because I knew what that bank would do if I didn't repay that loan.
Right. You had seen it happen.
Yeah, but it was a very wonderful vote of confidence. So all of a sudden we went from being, employees, high-level managers to high-level managers, executives, and entrepreneurs. And so from that point forward, we were out on the risk curve every day with clients, employees, profitability, all the different things a business owner has to face. And we had 300 employees at that time.
Oh my gosh.
And
so you did not buy a small business.
Yeah. So we were very active and very much focused on, keeping that business humming. So yes, that was a pivotal moment. And I guess sometimes when you take risk, you can do things when you have people that support what you're doing to help partner with you, maybe not directly, but maybe through more business or providing assurances, whatever they may do. But that's a way to get to that point. But make no doubt about it, at that point, it was like walking off to the end of the diving board and saying, okay, I'm jumping.
And I hope there's water down there.
And there was water, fortunately.
Well, what kind of exposure was that for you? I mean, was it the kind of thing where if it didn't work out, like that was financial ruin, or somewhere in between?
Well, if it hadn't worked out, it would have been financial ruin personally, because we pledged all our assets.
Wow, everything.
We had personal guarantees on the entire debt. And then also just the damage to the employees and their families. So we were highly motivated to make the deal work.
And reputational risk with your former employer bank now involved with the loan. That, I mean, you really were exposed in a
Right,
lot of different ways at that point.
right. Reputational risk with former bank and also with just the industry as a whole.
Hmm. So how long did it take for you to hit the pivot point where you went, okay, I think we're okay?
We had a really fortunate break occur where about 18 months after we bought it, one of our major clients came to us and said, we need to take this long-term contract we have with you and make it a short-term contract because of some accounting regulations that have taken place due to scandals that had gone on with Arthur Andersen and Enron and others, which we had nothing like that going on, but it was just a ripple effect going around big public companies. And we said, well, we borrowed all this money to help you satisfy running your office and your business. We'd like a termination fee.
Hmm.
And as fate would have it, we were able to negotiate a very successful termination fee, which got us debt free. And secondly, they also started referring other business to us with other clients because they wanted
Wow.
to see us succeed. So it was a tremendous, day when all of that occurred. And we never saw that going. But that's, as an entrepreneur, every now and then you get some lucky breaks,
Yeah.
some good things come along and you got to be ready to move.
Yeah, I have been thinking about that lately, both personally and just kind of what I see with other entrepreneurs. It, it, and the question of how much of success, how much of that formula is hard work and how much of it is luck. And my answer to that is yes. Right? I mean, you need both. For a legitimate business to succeed and do well. There's, I don't know that I've ever seen something that is, fully responsible for an individual with no, gratuitousness from someone along the way or serendipity along the way, or things moving in their favor like you just described, but also without that hard work, without the grit and perseverance to drive through the really dark hours. I don't, you may not get to the luck. You may not get to the good fortune that has to come along the way. So it does seem like both. But in your journey through this, did you ever index to one side of that or the other?
I think all entrepreneurs have their highs and lows and peaks and valleys, much like hiking a trail. And I would say that, anything that came along that created success, which was not from our own doing, we still, it still was extremely important that we had laid the groundwork. So somebody that was coming in would have confidence in us, would trust us, would know the kind of organization and people we were. So trust, grit, as you mentioned, determination, integrity, and 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 excellence. All of those things came into play. So if your business is known for those things, you've got a much greater chance of success and wonderful things coming your way. And that was certainly the case with us.
That's interesting. If you saw all these different economic cycles over your career. You mentioned the savings and loan crisis, the great financial crisis, 2008. You've still been in real estate through COVID, and there's multiple recessions and economic cycles through that process that I'm even leaving out. Being on the banking side as well as the investor side, what are one or two things that you've seen that have gotten people in trouble? Is there anything that stands out as principles that you've learned along the way that I'm never going to do that? That's too risky.
Yeah, well, I think in particularly commercial real estate, there are many things that can get you in serious trouble, but to try to focus on some of the major things, one is not recognizing that it's a cyclical business. something invariably comes along that causes a hot market cycle to go down and reset. Secondly, tied in with that is not having the appropriate capital structure, both in terms of equity and debt, and the right relationships that would stick with you and stay with you during the downturns. And third is diversification. Some things are just not going to work out because you are taking at times high level risk. And on the other side, when times are good, they will work out wonderfully well. But the diversification helps you sail through all that.
Yeah. So say a little bit more about that. Does the diversification give you the ability to have the patience when patience is needed, and to have the, kind of lethal strike force ready when an opportunity comes along?
Yes, oh, absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're a lender or an investor, if you have dry powder, so to speak, that's ready to go when things take a turn downward in commercial real estate, then you can do very well. That doesn't mean you won't have problems in your existing investments and portfolio, but you can, on the other side of it, find very opportunistic situations to help you sail through it.
The is this Has this played out for you where you don't have to be able to predict the cycles, the beginning and ends of cycles, with it, because you have diversification in place? Is that a true statement? And where have you been able to make more when have you been able to have more success on economic downturns, when things get hairy, or when things turn around?
Well, I think generally over the 40 years, I've done much better in the downturns.
That's interesting.
People that got too far out on the risk curve, whether it's inside a corporation or out on their own, leverage is a two-edged sword. And if you get over leveraged, you can go down, you can lose your business. So I think the other part of this is that during the downturns, you have to deal with fear. And 2008, 2009 was a time of fear. In the case of the company we had at that time, we took a different attitude and said, okay, somebody has got to come in and run into this fire and help put it out and clean it up, and should be, you know, rewarded handsomely. So we ran into the fire. Now, fortunately, we were not the ones burning, but we were the firemen coming in. And so, but that's still risky. But it also involves having a great team, great professionals, a lot of knowledge and training. So, just like in a lot of situations where a disaster occurs, there's somebody has to come in and, you know, help clean it up and then turn it around. So I've always kind of enjoyed that. I never wished for it to happen, but
Hmm.
I would say over half of my career was spent coming into these troubling times and situations and then figuring out how to survive through it. In real estate, the good people in real estate can survive through all this, the ups and downs. The people that, you know, don't recognize this, that cannot figure out a way to survive when things turn south, usually end up leaving the industry.
Hmm. And you're saying leverage is a big part of that determining factor of whether you can survive or not. Obviously, leverage can boost returns on an investment, but as you said, the other side of that sword is that it'll cut you up if you get too far out on it. So how have you been able to make that decision of how much is enough to get the returns that you're looking for, but not too much to get yourself cut up?
Well, it's a fine line and it's a balancing situation. And within the industry, when we're doing deals, we stress deals and can say, okay, this is maybe where things are today, but here's what happens if things take a turn for the worst, or we will assume certain risk criteria and say, can this deal withstand that? And you underwrite and evaluate what you're doing on the front end as well as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are times when there's just things you cannot underwrite, like who could have underwritten a global pandemic?
Right.
But a lot of the parties that made it through that in commercial real estate were very conservative going into it. So they're going to be fine. So it is a risk return industry where you have to understand what you're doing, have the training, and a lot of experience in order to succeed.
So that experience part, though, is that part of the what do I want to say, the superpower that you get from being around the business for so long, where you start making assessments in your gut just because you know how these things play out, and it's not your first rodeo, you've seen these things over and over again. Is there a gut side of it at this point of your career?
Oh yeah, definitely anybody who's been in the business, say 20 years or more, will tell you, yeah, there's certain things when people start saying certain things or doing certain activities, oh, I have seen this happen before, and maybe I ought to step back and pause. So there's a lot of different angles to that, but it definitely, you have to, when you see that, listen to your gut, listen to your spirit, and say why, and then take a pause and say, do I really want to do this or not?
Hmm. And that's really interesting to me, that's part of the price you have to pay to get to that point, is the struggle for, as you said, maybe 20 years or more, to be able to have that kind of natural insight. So relaying that to the outdoors, I've talked to many mountain guides and people that pursue difficult things, and almost everyone has a story where they get to a point and they say, typically I would take this trail, but there was something about that day that I just didn't feel right about it, and so I turned around. And maybe something happened, maybe it didn't, but there's a natural insight that by being in the mountains over and over and over again, as you said, your spirit, something inside your soul just goes, something's off, and I need to pause so that I don't get blown up here. And in your case, in real estate, there are plenty of opportunities to get blown up along the way. So that's really interesting. Now, let's talk a little bit about your launch pad from the real estate business into working with nonprofits and charities, both domestically and globally. I know you were on the board with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy for a while, so certainly speak to your time there, but what else have you done outside of your real estate career?
Sure. So my wife and I've had this wonderful journey of generosity, so to speak, and service that developed back in our late 20s. And we were at church one Sunday, and a young missionary came in from Kathmandu, Nepal, and talked about how he had gone over there on a shoestring and had started a mission, started a school. And this fellow wasn't much older than us. And we were just totally amazed at the risk he took and the work he was doing. And so we felt a tug to do something. And it also happened at that time, I was developing my habit of being an armchair explorer, of reading all these outdoor adventure books, which I
Mm.
love, because I was so busy with my banking and financial jobs. I just couldn't, take time off and go, to different places around the globe. And we had a family. We had 6 kids ultimately,
Oh,
so
that's
I
an
had a lot of
adventure in and of itself
responsibility
right
at
there.
home. Yeah. So, but I felt this tug to do something that was related to what I was hearing from this young missionary, and I was reading the book Seven Summits. That was a story about Dick Bass and his partner, who decided to climb, the seven tallest summits in all seven continents. So I came up with this vision one day on a morning walk, and I said, well, I can't do that, but maybe what I can do is support nonprofits, charity ministries on each of the seven continents and have a relationship with these nonprofits, not just, you know, send a check and wish them well and get a thank you letter, but you know, more along the lines of smaller nonprofits or more obscure ones that are out there that need help, and let's just see what happens. So, and my wife, she's totally supportive of things like this, and she's wonderfully wise at advising me on when to get involved and not get involved. So things just started appearing. So the first one was a neighbor friend of ours, his daughter, talking about risk, went down to Bolivia and opened an orphanage. And she did this in her early 20s. So we started supporting her. So that was outside North America, which we were already involved with different things in North America. But this was the first one outside North America. So it was South America. Then I had a college roommate who became an undercover missionary over in India and Bhutan and was doing work in that part of the world, particularly with college students. So I got involved with him. So then started visiting him in India and seeing some of the good work he was doing. I could never find anything in Europe for the longest time, or Asia, or Antarctica, in Africa. But I think the next one that came along was Africa. We met a young preacher who had just graduated from Moody Theology Seminary in Chicago. He had a vision to start a pastor's training center in Uganda. We just thought he was the real deal. So we took a risk and backed him, and his ministry has grown. In fact, he's now started a university over there, and he is flourishing. So that's where we checked the box on Africa. Then Australia had some things kind of touch and go, but ultimately through Tim Keller out of Manhattan. He was trying to do church revitalizations in Australia, and we connected in with them. That's been a good place to be involved. And then the two hardest ones were Europe. I kept running into dead ends in Europe, and then I was like bewildered as how to do something in Antarctica.
Okay, so I'm curious, one, why you had trouble with Europe, because I mean, obviously, it seems like there's a lot going on there, and a lot of church organizations already there. And then Antarctica, like, what what would be the opportunity there? So
yeah, so I think it was more or less culturally I wasn't looking in the right places and didn't have the right connections. I could have gone in through some of the bigger global organizations, but I didn't want to do that going back to the original vision. I wanted to do something that was more connected. And a lot of what's going on in Europe is more institutionalized or large scale versus a lot of small stuff. So oddly enough, I went over because some folks I was doing business with in London at the time kept telling me to go to Winchester, England, and go see the cathedral down there. And I'd heard about it through family, but I didn't really know what it was. And eventually in 2016, I did a day pilgrimage from London down to Winchester and went and saw the city and the cathedral and was absolutely blown away. And this, I did not realize that this was the original capital of England, and this is where everything started before it moved to London, and that, this is almost 1,000-year-old cathedral. And then when I went in there, I found out they were getting ready to restore what they call the Winchester Bible, of all things. So at this point, I was like totally, my socks were knocked off. I had no idea of any of this.
do you think your family has any tie back to that city based on your last name?
My family, I've traced it back to 1735 in America, and then I hit dead ends. But somewhere the name came from. So the surname is from there. So somewhere in the family. So I reached out to the cathedral, and we got involved with the cathedral, with the
Oh, wow.
restoration of the Bible, and then later with other things. And it's been absolutely fabulous.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So that was
That's got a
the
little Indiana Jones kind of feel to it.
oh yeah, there's a lot of stories of medieval knights and kings and queens, many that are buried in this cathedral. And this Bible was 950 years old. It's supposedly the greatest medieval Bible of that century. So it was just an incredible blessing to be a part of that. And we've done a lot of other things with them since then. And we have some good friends and relationships there, which has been part of what we were looking for. And then Antarctica, I was looking at things through McMurdo base there, U.S. military. They had a chapel there. There were some other things I was looking at. Never could get any traction and couldn't find anything. So one night I was on the internet just surfing around, and I was looking at churches and nonprofits in Antarctica, and I stumbled upon this beautiful church on an island called South Georgia Island,
Hmm.
which is in the Antarctica region
Okay.
in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean down near Antarctica, and found out that this was a very historic whaling center for the British and still a British territory. And this is where Sir Ernest Shackleton is buried,
Oh, is it really?
the great polar explorer. This was the
Wow.
launching pad for him and many other polar explorers. So I reached out to what ended up being a British heritage trust called the South Georgia Heritage Trust and started chatting with them and got involved with them. They had a museum there. They're doing some restoration. It's a lot of storytelling, and it's now a destination where tourists that are going to Antarctica will oftentimes go to South Georgia. So there's about close to 15,000 tourists a year now that go to this island, which is kind of like a modern day Galapagos island. It's being rediscovered. The wildlife is coming back. It's just an amazing natural place.
Have you been?
Um, no, but I'm going this fall, so I'm
Okay.
really excited about it.
Have you, on all these other organizations that you've supported, do you get boots on the ground and go and participate and see what they're doing in the different locations?
Yes, that's been part of the joy of it. Is we like to travel, I in particular, and so I've been to every one of them, except for the Bolivia one. We never made it to Bolivia because that
Mm,
was early on and our kids were young and we just couldn't swing it.
mm.
But I've been to, Africa, England, going to South Georgia, went to India 3 times,
Oh, wow.
went to Australia 3 times, to New Zealand twice. So it's been a wonderful experience, but generally my role when I go there is to be encouragement, provide encouragement, be a supporter, listen. If they want advice, I'm glad to, share it with them because so many nonprofits are struggling with business operations and things that are not necessarily, the focus of the mission, but just how to run the
Yeah.
nonprofit. So
Yeah.
I enjoy working with them on those types of issues. And we just develop lifelong friendships with these folks. And then our kids have been a part of this some too. So that's been
That's
another
cool.
benefit of it.
So, putting my financial advisor hat on for a second, there's lots of different ways to get involved and give to charitable organizations. Cash is the easiest, but and as you may be aware, but gifting assets or using donor advised funds or structuring it in a variety of different ways. Have you been able to utilize your success in other areas around real estate to essentially be the philanthropic engine to fund what you're doing around the globe?
Well, I would say, I had the good fortune to meet the folks at National Christian Foundation,
Yeah, they're
which is one
great.
of the largest foundations in the country, and they were located near where I live. So I developed
Right.
some relationships and friends there. So they gave me some great advice. They also connected me with organizations that allow you to gift funds in a responsible way and tax efficient way internationally, which I did not know about. So that was a huge benefit. I haven't really donated property to charities, but I've definitely donated time, and then works, so time, talent, and treasure
It's
are the
all of it.
ways that people give to charities, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's one, but generally I like to be involved with two, sometimes three, but three is very demanding.
Yeah.
So, but that's generally been the model.
Yeah. So again, kind of comparing that on a different canvas of outdoor pursuits, what you just described is kind of a planning and execution of a plan using a variety of different approaches. And I think that overlays perfectly to anything that we would do or the everyday explorer would try to build into their life. If you don't just get off the couch and go try to hike a 14,000 foot peak, you're going to get hurt. There has to be some thought and planning and then the execution along the way. So it's always interesting to me to see where the processes are similar, regardless of what the canvas is that the artwork is being painted on. And there's so much overlap between outdoor adventure pursuits and the business world as well. So I think you're doing a great job of highlighting where that occurs. One of the things that stood out to me about your resume as well is your involvement with Auburn University. You mentioned that a little bit ago, and as both of us are Tar Heels, so talk to me a little bit about why you chose Auburn to make a family gift to be a part of what they were building around the university, specifically in the real estate world. And did you look at it, anything in Chapel Hill before making that decision?
Sure. So, I love going to Chapel Hill, and I think they have an amazing business school, an amazing real estate program there. But when I moved to Texas for 13 years, it was very distant from UNC. So I
Yeah,
wasn't able to
certainly.
come back and go to basketball games or football games like I used to. So I kind of lost connection. And then when I came back to Atlanta, my kids, four of my kids got very interested in Auburn. So four of them went to Auburn.
Okay.
So, and it's less than 2 hours from Atlanta versus
Yeah.
6 hours to Chapel Hill. So it was convenient. I was going there anyway. And then we were recruiting employees from the business school there who ended up being just great employees. So I developed a relationship with the faculty in the business school. So it was all based upon family connections and relationships with the business school. And they approached me, to their credit, and,
Hmm.
and wanted me to get involved. And I thought it was a good place to try something out. And as I got into it, I felt like it was a very wonderful place to be engaged, both professionally, from a learning standpoint, from the standpoint of giving back. When you reach my age and you've been in business this many years, to just go off and just keep all of this knowledge and information in your head, it doesn't feel right. You want
Hmm.
to pour it into the next generation. So it allowed me the opportunity to do that. So that's kind of the Auburn story.
You've described so many different aspects that you've been involved with over your career. Does any of them rise to the top as the thing you enjoyed the most?
Whoa. I think through all of it, it's key relationships. There are people that I have as business relationships who are now close friends that I've known for over 30 years. In, you know, friendships, relationships, and being able to stay focused on what's important in life. I mean, my wife and I, we're both very committed Christians. We're certainly flawed, but we try to, live a good Christian life, and we try to really stay focused on our family. So that has served us well over the years. Both of us are very high energy. And certainly in my case, I needed to channel my energy in a good direction. so, so, being around great people, great relationships. I look back and there's some people that helped me out tremendously in my career, my path, and my journey that just did me a world of good, and I can never repay them. And it's a handful. It's 6 to 8 people, and I'm very, very grateful for what they gifted to me. And I hope I can do that with some younger
Yeah.
rising business people and nonprofit leaders.
I, I have heard that through so many of these conversations, regardless of why I was interviewing somebody, but relationships through the adventure are the things that matter. It rises to the top all the time. And I think I've said this before in different conversations. I'm a pretty committed introvert. I get recharged by kind of alone time, but even still, there the gas in the tank is still relationships, whether it's my family with my wife and kids or really tight friendships. I'm certainly not one that has a million friends, but the few that I have are really important. And it's interesting to hear you say that you've been involved in all these different things, that if all of the things burned away and you were left with the relationships, it sounds like, that was worth the price of admission for you.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think, in our case, it was faith and family and then friends, these relationships, all of that. You can't go alone. You're going to stumble, you're going to fall, you're going to have accidents. You can't be alone. And then on the other side, you can serve by helping those when they stumble and they fall or they need help.
So you mentioned to me, I think before we started recording, that as you've traveled the world to, whether it's with the organizations that you're working with or just as personal travel, you've picked off hiking trails here and there. And obviously we mentioned your time on the ATC board. Where does your interest in anything outdoors come from?
So I grew up as a nerdy Boy Scout and got interested in the outdoors through scouting.
Okay.
And that's when I first discovered the Appalachian Trail, was through an assistant scoutmaster. And that was the first time I went on a long distance hike, was up in North Carolina
You
in the
remember
Roan
which
Highlands.
section?
Roan Highlands.
Oh,
Yes.
Roan Highlands. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite.
Yeah. So I went right into one of the most scenic parts of the whole
Yeah.
trail, and I was blown away and I fell in love with it. So that started me down the road of a lifelong interest in the outdoors. I had done a lot of camping, of course, and scouting, but I just kind of stuck with it because, I'm an introvert too. I can become an extrovert when I have to be, but it's
Yep.
stressful.
Yep.
But it's, the outdoors very much energized me also and recharged me. So even in college, I was involved in the outing club at the university. And then
Okay.
after that, I started doing more and then later became a scoutmaster for my sons when they were going through the program. But I always had in the back of my mind, I wanted to hike the trail, the whole trail. I knew I could never be a through hiker, but I am a section hiker and I'm getting closer to finishing it. But then
Hmm.
I discovered, you know, on these travels, international travels for both business and education or family travels, it's quite a wonderful thing to go find a amazing outdoor trail wherever you are and go discover that. So I've been able to hike different sections in different countries, particularly over the last 10 years, and that has been just a really beautiful experience to have.
Do you have a favorite? Is Roan Mountain still at the top of the list?
Well, certainly on the Appalachian Trail, it is. There's a lot of amazing vistas there.
Yeah.
I would say the Routburn Trek in New Zealand
Hmm.
in the Southern Alps one day was quite amazing and wonderful. That was definitely high up on the list. I can remember one time just wandering through the countryside in the hills with my former college roommate on a long day hike in northern India in the Himalayas in an area called Sikkim. And we were so unusual looking that people would stop and stare at us. So that was definitely high up on the list. And I've done hiking in Greenland and Iceland. So the geology is just stunning and shocking to a degree.
Hmm.
So, it's a lot of different variety of experiences. I hate to say any one particular place is far beyond the others. Every country seems to have something unique that's just really exciting to see and be explore.
So those are kind of high points or interesting points of all your business and life and charitable pursuits that you've done. Is there anything that stands out as a particularly low point along the way?
Well, I think, certainly on the business side of things, the late 80s, early 90s, despite what people may remember in recent history, that period of time, the late 80s, early 90s, was, from my perspective, the worst time in commercial real estate. Bank failures galore, property developers all going broke. And so there was a time there, it's like, well, what's next? It was totally unclear what the future was. And all of us had been with great firms or great organizations and had good friends. And so you knew you were going to have to start over again. Everybody had to. So that was, a period of perseverance. And then on the rest of the business time, I mean, it was like, you sell your business and you go, what's next?
Mm.
So purpose in life is very important. So fortunately, I found some things that I really wanted to do that I felt energized me and was a way to give back. And that's been really, I think, since I sold my business, I've had the most enjoyable period of my business career from the prior years. And so that's been a blessing. On the personal side of things, when you have 6 young kids, it's challenging. Raising
Yeah.
kids is challenging, and you love them, but you have to, bring them along, and then you learn from it. So that's a huge challenge, and at times can be really, really rough. And then, later in life, I've had some health issues, not severe or life-threatening, but I've had some health issues that have slowed me down. So you have to, go through those. And, when you're very much a person that likes to be all out all the time and something like that happens, you have to, realize, this is not a period for that. And then you need to change your attitude and slow down. So
Yeah.
those are some of the highs and lows that come to mind.
I talk to a lot, both on the podcast and with people that I work with. Both tend to be a community of hard chargers, just, people with that grit and determination that will put their head through a brick wall if they need to, which is great when you need it. But if it's all the time, you're going to end up hurting yourself. And I put myself right in the middle of that bucket as well. But I think what you're describing is really an interesting point that I talk to a lot of founders and executives and people that hit liquidity events, that if the thought has not been put into what am I moving towards, rather than, it's really easy to think about what you're moving away from. I'm retiring, selling the business, that's behind me. But that next day is, I mean, it scares the hell out of people, because you get to it and without any forethought, it seems like an abyss. But it maybe you can speak to this, your experience with this a little bit, but with planning and knowing what you're moving towards, it creates opportunities and a canvas to paint in a way that you didn't have before when you had the business or the full-time job. What has that transition been like for you in moving away from something or moving towards something different?
Well, that's a challenge all of us go through. And it's, I think there's ways to look at it as an opportunity rather than a threat. I had the good fortune in my 20s to hear an amazing teaching on setting goals. And it was a sermon series on setting goals. And when I came out of college, I came from a middle class background with no wealth or privilege. So, what I was going to be able to do in life was going to be based upon, what I was able to strive for, work for, and have good fortune come my way. So I realized after going through these lessons on goal setting that that was something that I could dig into. So I started setting goals in my 20s, and I actually update them every year. And as I've
Do you
gotten
really?
older, yeah, every year over New Year's I do it. And and with those goals, I develop goals in different areas of my life. It's not just career, it's all the different major areas of my life. And I try to stay focused on them. And then I realize I need to reset them. You go through different phases of your life, different things are important. And so that has served me well, kind of saying this is the vision of where I want to be at this point in time. How am I going to get there, which is the mission? And then what are the strategic goals I need to pursue to get there? And much like hiking, long distance hiking, it's one step at a time. You have to take that first step and go towards those goals. And sometimes they're many, many years to get there. But, I think that really helps, along the way in terms of making for a higher quality life.
Do you ever go back and look at your earlier goals that you had set?
Yeah, I actually keep them all. And
Do you really?
and I would say that the one lesson I learned from that was earlier on, I didn't set big enough goals
Mm,
because there's an element of fear that comes with setting them.
absolutely.
And then as time went on and I got more confidence, I would set bigger goals. And I still do that, even at this point. I
How
think
did,
some people are amazing. They can set incredible goals very
yeah.
young in their life, huge goals. And that wasn't me.
Yeah, it sounds like yours have been more not incremental, but you've built on the goals as along the way rather than having some like Elon Musk, let's go to Mars kind of goal.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I'd say
Which,
incremental, but expanding at the same
yeah.
time. Yeah.
So to kind of tie all this up with someone that has gone through a career and had successes along the way, like you have, and really enjoyed life as you did it, how do you still approach the decisions that you're making, the things that you're doing at this point to still feel like you're taking risks that keep you sharp and kind of with a beginner's attitude with the things that you're pursuing?
But I would say that just because you're older doesn't mean you don't have the same risk. You may be older, more experienced and wiser, but you're still going to have a lot of the same risk or different kinds of risk. So you need to be prepared for that. Whatever planning you can do or preparation you can do beforehand certainly helps. I think staying focused on the important things really helps. So there's a lot of interesting books out there written about finishing well.
Hmm.
And it's not uncommon for people towards the end of their career to, step out of whatever role they were in and just flounder or have issues.
Yeah.
And but there also are a lot of great stories and examples of people who stepped out of those roles and went on to the next thing and did amazingly well. Colonel Sanders, Kentucky Fried Chicken, what a great example of that. But so, it's important to realize, that's where you are and that's what you need to figure out.
Yeah. So do you have a top two or three book that you would recommend to anyone if they were interested?
Well, Bob Buford wrote a book on finishing well. I really enjoyed that. And the book was mostly case studies, for lack of a better word. It was where he described people who had stepped out of amazing careers and situations and went on to do other things. I think I had two older gentlemen friends and mentors that gave me two pieces of advice that I thought were very invaluable when I was in my mid 50s. And they said to me, number one, what is a noble cause you can get involved with?
Hmm.
And that's not an easy question.
No, it's not.
And it's different for everybody. But that challenged me, and that was what I needed, because you tend to think of like, well, I'll just kind of go do what I've been doing, or I'll
Mhm.
continue building whatever widgets I was building. But why not think of what's a noble cause to be involved with? The second thing was, okay, you could be full-time retired, but people are going to come to you and others are going to come to you and say, you ought to do this and you ought to do that, or maybe if you should consider this. But what you need to remember is take a pause and figure out what is it that you really want to do, because you deserve it. And what's important to you to do. And listen to yourself for a while. You've been listening to a lot of other people for many, many years and answering to their needs, requests, demands, but now you can make this decision. And what I discovered based upon both of those was that there was all of these pin-up things that I hadn't thought about since I was probably a teenager and early adult, that I had dreamed about and had just gone latent because
Hmm.
I could do it. And then I said, well, why not go back and revisit some of that or do some of that? And so that has been kind of an awakening that those two questions caused me to have. And I'm very grateful to them for sharing that with me.
Would you mind saying what a few of those things were that you've kind of reawakened to that you hadn't thought about in years?
Oh my. Well, I do like to explore and I do like the outdoors. So
Yeah.
I have a big bucket list of places I want to go and things I want to see, and certain aspects of and I've done a bunch of it, and it's, been just fabulous to be able to have the good fortune to do that and to particularly do it with family when I can.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But I guess it goes back to being the old Boy Scout. I've always enjoyed service
Hmm.
and giving back, and that really energizes me. But finding the right place to give service is the key. So I've been able, through the university and a few other things, find the right place to give back service. And I realize there's areas of service that I could never give back and do not need to be involved with. It's important to know where I should be involved and where I
Yeah.
should not be involved.
I think those two focus questions are, to me, seem extremely valuable. I mean, that's I'm going to take that away from this conversation. But as I think about anybody that listens to this, the everyday explorer, outdoors or in the boardroom or whatever career they're in, being able to answer these two questions really largely drive you to living your great life right now and not living somebody else's best life for you, or doing the things that, I mean, it's so much of us get caught up in doing the things that seem right or that somebody else thought I should do, or, and I call that putting the mask on, and sometimes the mask is necessary, but when we wear it all the time, we get 20 or 30 years down the road and go, I don't even recognize myself anymore. And that's not, to me, that's not being fully alive. That's not living that great life right now. So your two questions here, I'm going to give you credit for them because you said them today, even though you got them from somebody else. But that seems extremely valuable to hone the laser in on the things that we need to be focused on.
Yeah, I think that's well said how you summarized it, and I think it's energizing and it's also very inspiring. I mean, every day it's a very joyful way to live
Hmm.
when you're pursuing things like that.
Well, and I would say that's what everybody wants. No matter what we're doing with our life, everybody largely would want joy and fulfillment in all the things that they do. So, Greg, this has been great. For, you and I just met for the first time today through mutual good friends, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, both as an entrepreneur as well as somebody that is on adventure where I can myself. And I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Joshua, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. I wish you success with your podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to another episode of the On Adventure podcast. Be on the lookout for another episode dropping in a couple weeks. And be sure to go to our YouTube page and subscribe and follow us there, as well as on all the socials from Facebook to Instagram and LinkedIn. Until our next episode, I hope you stay safe and stay on adventure.